I'm Brett Cooper, and this is the Frontline Mobility Edge, where we discuss the latest in mobile device technologies and how they're shaping the frontline landscape business. Thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the BlueFletch Frontline Mobility Edge podcast. I'm Brett Cooper, joined today by DeHihns, and we are going to talk about our key takeaways, or our each 4 key takeaways from NRF 2026. So Lee and I were in New York a couple days ago for NRF, which, if you haven't been to it, is the National Retail Federation Big Show. And it was 40, 50,000 people, it feels like, there over 3 days. So a lot of international folks from U.S., North American retailers, a number of LATAM retailers there, and then vendors of all sorts of different technologies. So technology for store ops, technology for IT, everything you've probably seen in a retail environment will be at NRF. And Lee and I walked around a lot, talked to a lot of people. We had a demonstration booth showcasing some of our new biometric login technology, which was got some really good questions around that. But just walking around, we took some notes on things we saw and wanted to articulate what those were. And I'll start out with my first interesting takeaway from NRF, which was I don't know if it's that interesting, but it's tariffs are real, which is it's something with 2025 going into 2026. Definitely, there's been a lot of retailers that have been wait and see what happens. A lot of things that were previously sourced from global markets are getting a lot more expensive for retailers, and they've had to optimize costs and change structures, change where they're building things or shipping things from. I think the big thing for me is it's not just theoretical. A lot of people are making decisions based upon tariffs and how that spend is, and came up a lot in conversations, and I think there's no end in sight. So it's something that we just need to plan and deal with over the next 4 years in North America, and probably for a lot of the global companies as well. I talked to a lot of global companies that were selling to North America, and it became very difficult for them in certain situations. So I think as companies are looking things at either technology or other things, make sure you know where it's sourced from, build in tariff protection into whatever models you're building out, and really think about, if you're looking at the product side or tech side or infrastructure side, think about those, the tariffs as a potential thing to have in your contracts and negotiations. And it's tough. I think for us, we've had a lot of customers that sat on buying new mobile hardware that use our software on. It's definitely something that's been out there. I don't know if Lee, if you had any other thoughts on the tariffs and the macroeconomic pressures we've seen on a lot of these retailers.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting if you take the phrase tariffs are real and you actually extrapolate what that means, it's a lot of 2025 was a bit of a wait and see to see how much of the uncertainty would be something that was always in place for the foreseeable future or was going to go away. And everyone's come to terms with the fact that the volatility is part of what they need to be planning for. So I think to your point, the tariff readiness side of things, you need to build a checklist for that to make sure you're incorporating that into buying cycles for refreshes. And then also you brought up a good point from just making sure you're baking that into contracts, particularly if you're purchasing something that is perhaps going to change in cost year over year. You want to make sure you're not going to go from one price to plus 30% or something like that. There's always going to be ways to build in protection. So something to be thinking about for sure.
Yeah. Neither Lee nor I are lawyers, so consult your lawyers and your contract guy, but definitely, whether you're a vendor selling things or somebody buying things, make sure you're thinking about tariff protections. So Lee, your first key takeaway you want to talk about is something I know you're not always a fan of. But
yeah, I guess it's a hot take maybe. Kiosks are, I'm saying the term everywhere, but definitely from an engagement perspective, not only from a customer side of things in retail, but also from an employer side. Kiosks are more or less ubiquitous in terms of walking around the show floor. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of them because it's probably just me being old man yelling at cloud, but it does make me feel like I'm drafted into working at the store that I'm in as opposed to asking for help. But definitely the reason the kiosks are gaining in popularity is because they can help close the labor gaps. They can increase speed on simple transactions and increase throughput. And there's even lots of really cool interactive things within the kiosks to do things around increasing wallet share or selling on additional products. I think where it can be a problem is, there's not really a way to manage something being abandoned or not setting up expectations correctly within the kiosk itself. So I've mentioned the kiosk feels like work side of things can be difficult if you don't know how many steps you're into a process before you can get what you came to the store for. Also, the voice activated kiosks, particularly in like ordering situations, I think are going to be really difficult if you're in any sort of a crowded environment where your cheeseburger with no lettuce could easily be a chicken sandwich with extra lettuce, depending on what the bot decides. But I think the takeaway there is making sure that the implementations are good. So I think my frustration is around poor implementations, right? Everybody's been to a website or a kiosk or interacted with technology that we're frustrated with. I think the kiosk is no different. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Brett.
I like some of the kiosks I saw. Some of them were, I'm like you. I find the people that work at a lot of the stores move incredibly fast at checking me out. And I always get frustrated when I'm stuck behind somebody who can't seem to operate the self-checkout. And there'll be a line of like 20 people and they don't know how to look up and onion on the screen. Right. So I feel some frustrations there. I understand the value. There was one demo I liked. I think Elo had one of their partners in their booth, and they were showing off a auto parts lookup kiosk, and it was AI driven, where you just walk up and talk to it and say, "Hey, I have a 64 Cadillac with a 390. What oil filter I need?" I was next to somebody who did that demo, and it didn't work as correctly as my 2016 4Runner, but it was a very interesting demo that used AI and a kiosk to solve a problem that if you ever buy auto parts or windshield wipers, you don't want to have to spend 5 minutes looking through a paper book in your auto store or having to wait in line for the guy at the counter to help you out. So I think things like that, where it's a discrete use case, it definitely made sense to have kiosks. And I've seen other things like at hardware stores where you have like a plumbing item that you're trying to find or look up. I know a big one for me where if I'm doing, they're called cartridges for faucets when my kids break them, being able to find those is always a pain in the butt. So I think there's a lot of discrete use cases for kiosks where they help the customer out a lot. But I think it's the balance of making sure you have a great UX for it.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want your kiosks to create a labor log jam because there's only one person to manage the 8 self-checkouts or whatever it ends up being. And all the red lights are on. But yeah, I think overall they're not going away. And I think it's just people finding, to your point, Brett, like really discrete use cases where, particularly if you're in a large footprint environment, a kiosk could easily point out where something is much more quickly than waiting for someone or wandering an aisle to find someone to ask them that question.
Yeah, 100%. All right. So my second key takeaway was the presence of more, I'm going to call them lower cost mobile devices. And I think this is, in the space we play in, which is enterprise mobility. You've had Zebra, Honeywell, Samsung, and then there's always been the I'm going to call them like the grouping of, cheap Chinese companies is what people used to call them. I think a lot of those devices are a lot more capable now. So there were a number of companies I talked with either sourcing things from Korea, China, or other countries. They actually had pretty good mobile devices at a very competitive price point. And one of the things that I noted, and even some of the leadership from Zebra said this, is that a lot of companies are trying to get mobile devices in the hands of more employees. And you don't need a super high-end scanner on every single device if you're just trying to do a product lookup or to use a chat or Microsoft Teams feature. So I think the thing I noticed, there's a lot of really capable devices that are out there. I think it's good for the overall ecosystem because it has, there's going to be more devices across different spectrums of employees and users. I think the key there, don't be cheap when you need to be expensive. So if you're in a warehouse scanning boxes that are 10 feet away, make sure you have a device that has the more expensive scanner or imager. know the capabilities and drop specs. You have a device that is probably going to get dropped on concrete. Make sure you have one that is IP spec for that.
I think another side of that too is we saw that from the retail side. We had retailers coming up and asking us what options were for just a good enough device.
Yeah, it's interesting. We definitely had more than one conversation with people asking us that. And, I think the other piece with devices I think about too is just the support and life cycle. So if you're going to have a device for 2 years, know that it's a 2-year device, and you can get away with not having a big support contract. But some devices will need to be 6 or 8 years in usage or life cycle. And I've been to enough warehouses where I've seen devices that are 8 years old still in use. So I think know which end of the spectrum you're on from a life cycle standpoint.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so hopping into Lee's second key takeaway, what was that was something with shelf labels?
Yeah, so ESLs, also known as electronic shelf labels, and when I started at BlueFletch in 2015, one of the first conversations I had with a grocer was around electronic shelf labels, and they've been coming for a long time, and I think we're at a point where these are going to become more and more common because from a labor savings and pricing agility perspective and promo accuracy, you can really do something in real time across your entire store or across a set of stores. So what it really does is it allows you to change the price on these labels, from a centralized location. It's really helpful for things in high change categories. If you have a competitor you're trying to match prices with, you can essentially do that instantaneously. And also, if you're labor constrained, there's a lot of retailers out there that have large footprints with 2,000 or 3,000 stores, but maybe only 1 or 2 full-time associates on the floor at any given time. It makes a big difference in terms of being able to change the pricing over as quickly as possible. I would say some things to think about with that is you have to make sure that you are very well integrated with what your store footprint looks like, what the planogram sets are, and make sure that data is integrated and very clean, because you can run into a lot of problems. You really do run into the garbage in, garbage out side of things. So I think you just have to be very careful, because any mistake that you make is going to be instantly reflected on the shelf and available for purchase at the wrong price from the public.
Yes, make sure it's secured as well. Yeah, I think the other point on this too, especially with back to the first point of tariffs, where an avocado from Mexico may cost you 99 cents today. Tomorrow it may cost you $4.34 based on the whim of certain people.
Yeah, and I think something to think about there is just being able to rapidly merchandise as well, right? So changing around a set to some extent can be a lot more fast if you can just keep the labels where they are, if your set is staying relatively the same size, and then just change out the prices without having to move anything from that perspective.
Yep. All right. It's my third key takeaway, which I noticed in our effort as I walked around, was camera tech, and to some effect, sensor technology is getting really good. I know this is back to your point earlier. We did some early camera projects 7-10 years ago now, and the technology and the things you can get for the price you can get are really impressive. And, Amazon Go is probably the first to do this. I think I did a blog post a couple of years back on this, but I took one of our newer sales engineers to the Amazon Go. They had a store in NRF, and I bought the worst breakfast sandwich ever for $12. I think they made them last year. But it was, be able to walk in, and there's a lot less cameras, I think, in the Amazon Go store this year than previously. Be able to walk in, pick an item off the shelf, walk out, and it charges me accordingly. It is still magical, but I think the price point is starting to come down a lot of this technology, and it's related to better sensors. So the sensors keep getting better. Look at your cell phone now versus 10 years ago. And I think the other thing is the AI at the edge, the ability to put processing and chips into cameras that can do this. And I know I saw some cool vendors that had cameras with built-in AI co-processors, which is impressive. And then even that, you can put computers on the edge that can handle a lot of this, so you're not sending data up to the cloud and having to push gigs and gigs over the network. So I think things with cameras, you get like the shelf cameras, so you can watch shelves, no stockouts. You can do things like the LP cameras are getting better at doing detection. You can watch things like cues, look for safety flags. So there's a lot of things that you can take advantage with some of this newer camera technology. I think a couple of things to be cautious of are, as always, privacy. So consult your lawyers. Lee and I are not lawyers.
Yep.
So ensure you understand the privacy constraints in your state's locale or country. And then, from a standpoint of false positives, so being able to make sure that somebody is who you think they are, especially things like LP, is when Lee walks in, does the camera think he's Brett, which is a little awkward at times, especially if you're giving a demo. I think definitely it's cool technology to try out. We'll see a lot more of it making it into stores over the next 2 or 3 years. And I think the technology is really starting to get there with us.
Brett, if you were a retailer and you were thinking of implementing camera technology, what is the decision tree essentially that you might look at for how to determine where best to test something like that in the store?
It's going to really depend on the store format. So I always think of it similar to RFID. Is like I saw a lot of retailers a couple of years ago say, what items should they be putting RFID tags on? And it's, here's the price threshold. Use a camera to do that. And I know one of the demos we did with somebody was have a camera in a department. You detect if there's a customer there. And the example would be like, if you're a flooring company, flooring doesn't sell itself. So if you have a customer that's in the, a specific flooring that's a high price item, make sure if you see somebody dwelling there, have a camera flag and notify your employees. Back to the earlier example of like an auto parts store. If you see somebody who's dwelling in a certain aisle looking at spark plugs, high margin item, definitely notify your employees that you have somebody over there. It's also potentially an LP item as well. So really thinking about the mix of those things and using that to drive those use cases where you start out testing those.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Lee, your third key takeaway was around the customer interaction, customer engagements, and loyalty.
Yeah, and it's there's been concepts of omni-channel and endless aisle again that have been talked about for more than 10 years at this point. But I think what really struck me this year was the first time I walked around and really saw a lot of vendors that are out there that would manage the loyalty programs for retailers from the perspective of knowing your customer throughout their life cycle and engaging with them inside the store, whether that's through, you can do bespoke signage based on who they are. You can do things within the application itself, like a mobile app that's a loyalty item. And you can also, monitor, you can essentially monitor what they purchase inside the store and then send them reinforcement on things that might be interesting to them outside of the store experience so they could purchase online. And I think what it does is a few things. It really lets you engage with the customer and let them develop affinity with the brand. But at the same time, it also allows you, again, we talked about it in some of these others, from a labor savings perspective, the customer at that point, a lot of times can come into the store, be ready to purchase something. And if it's going to be a transaction that's relatively quick, they can essentially self-engage to some extent. And I also think it allows you to be able to make the frontline worker, the opposite side of that is bring the frontline worker into that. So you really know who the customers are when they're coming into the store and know what they're interested in, and just increase that wallet share. So it's something that I think is really coming together, and you do see some really successful loyalty programs out there where the people have very strong affinities for the brand based on the loyalty programs that they're getting. And in return, it's a relatively small cost from a retailer perspective.
Yeah, especially in the age of, I'm going to call it the influencer or social influencers. There's certain loyalty programs where you'll see it on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram of, hey, here's the program for this company. And that creates that flywheel of drawing a lot of people into those retailers. And it can make a measurable difference.
Mm-hmm. I think it also helps with like merchandising as well, right? So you're going to know who in an area or what group in an area purchases particular sets of items more frequently based on who they are or where they are. And you can if you need to reflect the in-store inventory to be more in line with what you're purchasing, it's going to be a lot more streamlined from what you can carry in the store.
Yeah, 100%. You're like for like, your suburban versus urban demographics definitely makes it easier to target those.
Absolutely.
So my fourth and final takeaway or thing I noted at NRF was display technology is getting pretty awesome. And there was a section downstairs that was just, I'm going to call it the hologram aisle, which was a lot of interesting displays. And there were even people across in their booths that were using this for booth interaction, whether it's a hologram of William Shatner or somebody like talking about your product, or just a more interactive like hologram, looks like something's floating in 3D space, or even just some of the digital displays that were large format that looked really good and drew customers in. So I think there was a lot of this that's a lot more compelling. It feels a bit like we're living in Futurama or one of these places where you walk and just all these different things. But I think the technology is, the ability to attract on a lot of these display tech is, it's getting there. It's something that will, if it makes sense, if it's a high margin item, something you want people to look at, or a promo, some of this technology is definitely pretty cool. So, but I think to that point, when you look at it, make sure you're spending based on the ROI. So if there's a expensive hologram you want to put in place, it needs to be matched up to the ROI for that product. So, doing a low-end product is not necessarily as advantageous as a $300 pair of shoes that you can show in a really cool hologram. But I think it's finding those use cases and just figuring out, can you increase your engagement and or lift on those products with one of the newer display tech.
Yeah, so it's not cool for the sake of cool. You can actually measure something like conversion or basket size or dwell time or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Lee, your fourth and final point, which we haven't said much about AI up until now. So fire away.
I'm amazed we made it this far, given how many booths mentioned AI. This actually goes back to the first point around how tariffs are real, for Brett's first observation. So cost controls are hugely important, obviously. And AI is something that can help with that. So there were booths there that were actually showing how this tool can actually help with the return on investment and buy cost out, and not just something that's really cool or maybe doesn't have a real good practical point of view to it. So some of the things you can be thinking about when it comes to this is around labor forecasting based on historical data, for year over year or even month over month or day over day, to make sure you're having the right amount of people on the floor at the correct time. Also tasking, inventory accuracy is a huge thing from the perspective of making sure you're carrying the right amount of inventory in the store so you don't have too much overhead there and you aren't constantly running out of items. Shrink reduction is another side of it. And also you can use AI for something like returns reduction as well. So if there's a product in the store that's purchased historically and it gets returned, more than you would like, you can maybe understand why you are carrying that and if it's even worth it. So it allows you to theoretically have less goods on hand, but also have a better understanding of why you're selling and when you're selling it. So I think the key there is just to approach AI with a key end goal in mind from a cost savings perspective. I think where you have to be careful is you have to have, we talked about it already, really clean processes and clean data, because you're going to get, it won't be a hallucination, but it's just going to be bad conclusions if you're not feeding your AI the correct data.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, this is called out in one of the keynotes I sat through on the opening day, was that the AI is not going to replace people. So you think about your merchandising specialists, your inventory specialists, and the people that do the planning and ordering. They historically have run things on spreadsheets and systems that they can spend an hour building out a store plan for ordering. But if it takes their time down to 4 minutes, they get supercharged and have the ability to do deep dives into a lot more of those edge cases, like the one you called out of why does this item always get returned? So it gives them the time to go do that and focus on those more high human quality type of things that you need a human to look at to decipher. But yeah, anything that's on a spreadsheet or a database where people are running big queries, think about how you can make them more efficient by pulling that into those processes.
Yeah, just taking your example further with the merchandiser, if it takes them an hour store over store to pull together that data, but they can reduce it to your point 4 minutes. Think of how many more could be merchandised in the period of a week, for example.
Yeah. All right. So those are the least 4 of my 4 takeaways. A couple key things we jotted down, just some general themes or notes on this, but I think the question we framed this was, if I was a retail store ops leader, IT leader in 2026, where do you start with these technologies that I've seen over the last couple of days? And I think the first one we called out was, audit the key customer friction points. So think about the speed of which you engage with them, or the things that they're unhappy about in that engagement. And Lee, I know you talked about the loyalty programs. So loyalty programs are not necessarily, they're not a side project. They're something you need to focus on. So dig into those, figure out where you can improve that loyalty. Think about the bigger picture of retaining your customers, especially in these times where people are a lot more sensitive to what they spend. And there's a lot of customers that in this new economy are looking for better deals, but they will still be loyal if they have a reason to be loyal.
Absolutely. I think another one is correspondingly audit your employee friction points as well. AI, for example, be used to improve those? And examples would be looking at where maybe there's been incidents around safety issues in the store over a historical period of time. Can you augment the training a little bit to try to improve safety for your employees? That's one example. Again, from a staffing perspective, looking at it from a planning point of view, can you use AI to plan how better you can staff for week over week based on the volume in that store, rather than either calling people in last minute or sending people home? And it's the worst thing to get called in if you're a retail associate, and it's also really bad if you're there and you need the shift and they're like, all right, we need 2 people to get cut. So if you can avoid that kind of thing, I think it can really help people out from a friction point perspective.
Yeah, 100%. I think the next thing we talked about, just from an implementation standpoint, is figure out how to pilot in a discrete manner. So a pilot shouldn't be moving a battleship. It should be really thinking about how do you put something into a store or a part of the store, and then testing it and being able to prove or disprove the theories. And it's okay to disprove a theory that it doesn't work for this use case. And I feel like too many people get bought into the concept, this is going to be the thing, this is the way we have to do it. And I've seen way too many projects that have rolled out to chain, across a wide number of stores that are, if they had piloted it and realized, hey, this is not good, they would have saved a lot of money and some people's careers.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. Like, look at it as an opportunity to gain a quick learning at a low risk, and whether or not it works isn't necessarily good or bad. You just learn what's going to happen without a huge investment of time and money.
Yeah, I think a couple key things also around this, I think is, with, I'm going to call it a company, Cradlepoint, they provide like a network that you can just plug in a SIM card, an LTE card, or 5G card into. So you can actually have a network that's not connected to your store's network, and you can test these things out. So you can potentially ensure you're following governance, not having any sort of security breaches, and allowing you to get through so many cycles faster. Things like camera tech, even the electronic shelf labels that Lee mentioned, or even mobile devices. Testing a mobile device, within your store for a discrete use case that doesn't involve that device having to go onto your network and go through all of your existing security requirements.
Yeah, if you're looking to put a lower cost device in the hands of cashiers, or maybe those that are doing BOPIS orders or something like that, you can do that in one store with like 4 people really easily.
Yep. And the last key takeaway, I think, is back to the first point, is creating a tariff-driven plan. It needs to be not just the next quarter. It needs to be assumed for the next 3 years you're going to have tariff pressure and a lot of macroeconomic changes. How do you think about where you spend money and invest money. And I think a lot of this is also ensuring that you're investing. So a lot of people have sat on the sidelines and cut costs and done nothing. And the issue is that you may run into a situation where if you do nothing and the other guy is actually doing something and being strategic about it, you're going to get left behind. You're going to wind up 3 years from now finding that you have missed the boat on a lot of technologies or things that you probably should have tried or invested in, but were sitting on a pile of cash, and now he's making a lot more money than you. So definitely build that strategic tariff cost model and figure out where it's worth investing in versus where it's worth cutting in.
Yep. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Got any other key takeaways, Lee?
No, I just would say so far, knock on wood, Brett and I have managed not to get sick after NRF. So that's always good. Yeah. Hand sanitizer is the key, I think. I don't know.
I drank a lot of it. It was great.
Yeah. There's some pretty good flavors out there now.
Spectacular. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Frontline Mobility Edge podcast. If you have questions or follow-ups, feel free to reach out to us on our contact form at BlueFletch.com. And as always, feel free to like or subscribe. And have a good one.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning into the Frontline Mobility Edge. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe for more content every month. If you'd like to learn more about BlueFletch, check out the link in the description or visit us at BlueFletch.com. See you next time.